I grew up in a family that was decidedly outdoorsy. We gardened, we hiked, we were involved in scouts. We went on vacations to state and national parks, and we camped and cooked over an open fire. As a result, I love waking up in a tent. Gradually gaining consciousness as the sun rises and the wildlife begins its morning stirrings, I feel a sense of belonging in the woods, as if all is right with the world. Now I realize not everyone likes sleeping on the ground, but most of us enjoy some form of spending time outside, taking in fresh air, going for walks. In fact, I often see social media posts from members of this community featuring pictures of gorgeous sunsets or the critters visiting their yards, or sharing stories of time spent in the local forest preserve. There is something nourishing about unplugging and going outdoors, even if these days we do take our phones along to document the experience. On many of these vacations in my youth, my family and I had the opportunity to explore the history of the places where we camped. And I have a distinct memory of standing in front of a display detailing the forced removal of indigenous peoples across the upper Midwest, specifically the horrors of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And I found myself asking, how is it that this magnificent yet blood-soaked land where we are camping has been named George Armstrong Custer State Park? And the fact is that the history of the conservation movement in America has been laced with racism from the start. When John Muir proposed setting aside the land that would one day become Yosemite National Park, what he was protecting the land from was the violence and damage of white settler colonialism. This was land that had been stewarded by indigenous peoples in relationship with the rest of the natural world for hundreds of years prior to his time. John Muir spoke of Black and indigenous people with slurs and stereotypes that I will not repeat this morning. He was friends with avowed white supremacists and figures that loomed large in the eugenics movement. He very clearly wanted to protect the land so that he and his white friends could continue to hike and explore it. In other words, he founded the Sierra Club to provide experiences in nature for white, upper and middle class families like mine. That sense of belonging that I felt camping and spending time in the woods as a child was exactly as it was designed. That promised land, as our choir spoke, was not the case and is not the case for many people of color today. African-American author Camille Dungy writes of her trepidation when exploring the wilds of Virginia. She suggests that perhaps this was the result of reading too much pre-Civil War history. Quote, "Why would I, with both feet in the 21st century, fear dogs or malicious white men?" Well, of course, I also read the contemporary news, so I had current reasons to fear dogs and malicious white men. I heard and saw each creaking limb and trotting hound I encountered through one lens and just as easily another. Living in that old slave state, I regularly fought my fear. How dare the past keep me huddled up inside? Thus ends her quote. It is not simply the legacy of past violence visited upon people of color that makes access to green spaces unjust. The threats and intimidation, the messages that these spaces are meant for those with the privilege of whiteness are all too prevalent. Many of you will remember the story of Christian Cooper, a Black man who was birding in New York's Central Park on Memorial Day in 2020, the same weekend that also saw the murder of George Floyd. He had ventured with his binoculars into a portion of the park set apart as a bird sanctuary, with special rules to protect the birds and their habitat, including that dogs be on leashes. Amy Cooper, no relation to Mr. Cooper, decided to take her dog to the park that same morning. She disregarded the rules, and when her unleashed dog began barking at Mr. Cooper, he asked her to put the dog on a leash and reminded her that the area was protected. When she became incensed, Mr. Cooper began to record their encounter. And the evidence shows that she threatened to call the police and falsely report that, quote, an African-American man is threatening my life. And she proceeded to do so. In Mr. Cooper's own words, what she did was tap into a deep vein of racial bias. Tyree Nichols also loved the outdoors. He was an avid skateboarder and nature photographer. Mr. Nichols' mother, Rovon Wells, said of her son, that day when he left around 3 o'clock, he was on his way to Shelby Farms because my son every night wanted to go and look at the sunset. That was his passion, going to Shelby Farms to watch the sunset and take pictures. And as we know, on his way home from the skate park that evening, Tyree Nichols had an encounter with the police that would eventually result in his death. Going to take pictures of the sunset and making it home again alive is not a privilege. It is a right that every human being is entitled to, as is birding and hiking and any other use of our public parks, preserves, and green spaces. As Unitarian Universalists, we make this explicitly clear in our proposed new statements of values and covenant. Listen carefully for the expanded language. We covenant to cherish Earth and all beings by creating nurturing relationships of care and respect. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. These are our human relationships to each other as well as to the more than human world. From Article 2 again, we covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. Again, we have expanded what was our first principle. Not just to have inherent worth and dignity, but the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. And we covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible, inclusive communities. These are not only the communities inside these walls, but also the larger communities within which our churches are situated. These values expressed in this proposed update to Article 2 of our bylaws are statements of that big heart of universalism that Reverend Lucas articulated so lovingly and eloquently last week. We do not believe in eternal damnation, and we are committed to eradicating hell on this earth in this life. We are called to speak truth in this moment. I encourage each of us to share with each other our experiences of time spent in nature. Tell of the joy and the value that you find there. Be honest about the fear and intimidation you find there. And as we listen to one another, when we encounter an experience different than our own, hold it tenderly. Honor the truth of that story and the human heart that shares it. We are also called to support organizations that are working to reckon with the inequities of access to our public lands. Under the leadership of Secretary Deb Haaland, the United States Department of the Interior recently hosted a gathering of the First Nations representatives at Yellowstone National Park, inviting their leaders to share the culture and history of that land and to propose new stewardship initiatives. As citizens, we have avenues to express our support of programs such as this. Let's not neglect them. And our old friends, the Sierra Club, is now under the leadership of Ben Jealous, an environmentalist and civil rights activist, the former executive director of the NAACP. He is challenging the organization to a full reckoning of its history, including recent history, of oppression of all types. Your support of the Sierra Club gives you a voice in affirming this new direction. Use it. Use the power of your investments, your leadership roles, your social standing, your collective power as a congregation. Give resources to environmental organizations with diverse leadership and an intersectional focus, such as the Sunrise Movement and Faith in Place. If you have the privilege to increase safety and expand access to green spaces, that's what privilege is for. Wield it. Let us use the power of our radical imagination to hold a vision of a future where every human being embodies their birthright of a vibrant and nourishing connection to the web of life. And the extra added bonus, we can look to that web of life for encouragement in our work. This is what minister and civil rights leader Howard Thurman did, and I will give him the final word this morning. Look well to the growing edge. All around us, worlds are dying and new worlds are being born. All around us, life is dying and life is being born. The fruit ripens on the tree. The roots are silently at work in the darkness of the earth against a time when there will be new leaves, fresh blossoms, green fruit. Such is the growing edge. It is the extra breath from the exhausted lung. The one more thing to try when all else has failed. The upward reach of life when weariness closes in upon all endeavor. This is the basis of hope in moments of despair. The incentive to carry on when times are out of joint and men have lost their reason. The source of confidence when worlds crash and dreams whiten to ash. May we look to our growing edge and activate our hope as well. Blessed be, and amen.